Oh, okay, fabulous. And I am now going to turn it over to Jen Lewis.
Hi, thanks for coming to the artist panel over the lunch. We are super excited to talk to you about using visual art to stimulate social change. So you may have noticed there's art in 4 different rooms. We've got art over here, and then there's art also in rooms 245, 255, and 265. So what I'm going to do to get started, just to give everybody a little context about menstrual blood in art, is I'm going to read the preface that Ruth Green Cole, she's an art historian, has prepared for us. And everybody else will speak freely. I'm just going to read a little bit. So. While there are isolated cases of reverence for menstruation in general, many societies impose a strict set of rules about the visualization of menstrual blood in art and visual culture. These hegemonic and patriarchal codes controlling discussion, commemoration, or visualization of menstruation have been formed over long periods of time by many traditional communities, Orthodox religions, and the patriarchal medical gaze, which ultimately have been internalized by millions of women worldwide as negative and shameful. Over time, menstruation has developed a fraught and complicated semiotic that is to do with the vagina as a sex organ, reproduction, and censorship involved in exposing body parts. The question should be, if menstruation happened in another part of the body, one that is not associated with intercourse, would it have the same stigma? In the same way, the continuous concealment of the reproductive body from society has created the false assumption that a leaky body is unnatural, and when it is concealed, the body is acting normally. Forgive me, I'm not familiar with this artist, so I'm going to slaughter their name. Lucy Irigoyen has observed fluids are implicitly associated with femininity, maternity, menstruation, and the body. Fluids are subordinated to that which is concrete and solid. Therefore, the body is something that should be controlled to enable a prescribed representation of self-identity. In particular, menstruation is something that has been codified as uncontrollable, that which needs to be organized, managed, and contained. Hence, the cyclical continuation of performative acts creates the appearance of a natural state. Butler explains, gender is not a fact. The various acts of gender create the idea of gender, and without those acts, there would be no gender at all. Gender is thus a construction that is regularly concealed its genesis. To understand menstruation as a gendered blood is to recognize the ritualization of difference through cleansing practices, psychoanalytic classifying, and other constructs that affect the position of women. During the early 1960s, some years before the growth of an organized feminist movement in the visual arts, artists Shigeko Kabuka and Carolee Schneemann positioned their bodies in and as their art. They employed the modernist language of abstract expressionism, but to the contrary of its patriarchal expectations. At this time, women artists were interested in debunking or overthrowing modernism because of its supposedly reactionary desire to ensure artist presence and dismissal of body art projects. The female artist body became a gesturing, expressive body, a mode of projecting nonconformity, suffering, activism, and excess as a way of laying claim to being itself. As Kabuta said in her video poem, "I am woman, feel. I bleed, therefore I am." Kabuta's vaginal painting, Schneemann's interior scroll, and Anna Mendieta's body tracks show a spatial and metaphorical use of paint as gendered blood. In subjugation of abstract expressionism, artists like Kabuta used an intermingling of painting and performance to demonstrate that women have a voice within art making. Kabuta, Schneemann, and Mendieta used their bodies as a site to explore paint as blood for female expression and demarcate a space as a reaction by women artists to the dominant ideology surrounding painting. Artwork such as Kabuta's vagina painting and Schneemann's Meat Joy destabilized the conventions of art history criticism, paving way for the widespread feminist art making. Judy Chicago's depictions of menstruation in Red Flag and Menstruation Bathroom have become the most documented artworks that visualize menstruation in popular culture, not to mention Schneemann's interior scroll as the canonical performance of vulvic space has become the ultimate anti-classical sealed body presentation. There were, however, a few other important blood prints from the 70s decade, such as Schneemann's Bloodwork Diary and Judy Clark's Menstruation, as well as occasions of menstrual performance. For instance, Catherine Elway's Menstruation 1 and Menstruation 2, which were performances of horizontal blood inscriptions through bleeding, drawing, and writing. Through performance, bloodletting, or painterly gestures incorporating a trace of the body, we also have Marina Abramovic, Gina Panay, Mendienta, and later Orlan. These artists all inscribe their blood as gendered, ultimately demarcating a space for contemporary visualizations of menstruation. In the 70s, it was important to draw attention to and be proud of issues and topics that have been swept under the rug, such as menstruation. This is still very much the case in contemporary art. Looking forward, has anything changed substantially? Do artists dealing with menstruation in art have something new to say, or are they still struggling to get patriarchal societies to own up to their prejudices around menstruation? What contribution does visualizing menstruation have to social change? And will art about menstruation and becoming highly visible enter the mainstream, thereby making a paradigm shift? Works made by such artists utilize menstruation or the semiotic of menstrual blood to express ideas of gendered space, taboo, abjection, lived experience, and social cultural inequality. The multiplicity of art mediums such as painting and printmaking, photography, film, and installation allow us to shape new understandings and relationships to menstruation. Artworks that deal with menstruation in many different ways are important because they work against negative stereotypes by actively reevaluating gendered blood and showing it in a positive, defiant, or ambiguous light. Now menstrual blood becomes a pigment that embodies the creative value of women. That's the preface in the exhibit catalog that was written by Ruth Cole Green from New Zealand, and I think it frames up all of the artwork perfectly here. And with that, I'm going to introduce the artists, and they're each going to speak about the art that they've put in the show. So our first speaker will be Diana Alvarez, a PhD student in the Department of Women's Studies at Texas Women's University. She's interested in creating menstrual activism through the practice of socially engaged art. She believes that engaging with your own menstrual blood can be in a transformative new frontier in feminist love and radical self-acceptance. Gabriela Boros will follow Diana. She's a multimedia artist who has been shown nationally and internationally. She's known for her narratives which depict themes that touch upon her Israeli, Jewish, and feminist background. Currently, she makes woodblock prints in black on white, which express a heightened story with concision of line. Additionally, she makes paintings, art books, sculpture, and drawings. Following Gabriela will be Ingrid Block, who's known for creating art that is humorous and thought-provoking. She transforms everyday objects into something entirely different from their intended purpose with the goal of creating conversations. Her works have been featured in museums and galleries throughout the United States, and she's appeared in numerous books and publications. Following Ingrid will be Lucy Madeline. She's an activist, educator, and award-winning artist whose multimedia works on the construction of female identity and the body have been exhibited in the U.S. and internationally. She's a sex educator for Planned Parenthood and teaches and lectures on menstruation and feminist topics. Kyle will be our final speaker. She's from upstate New York, studio artist who's roaming around Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She received her BA from Ursinus, is that? Ursinus College, where she focused on gender and women's studies across disciplines. This greatly influences her current studio work concerning the gender, the body, reproduction, and production. So, Diana.
Excellent. Okay, can you guys hear me well? Okay, excellent. Okay, so my work is on socially engaged art, which to me meant that the kind of art I do always has to happen in front of people, right? And so I thought the best thing to do was take things that happen when I'm alone and broadcast them. So I had this class called Art Activism in America, and I was like, okay, and our assignment was to create some kind of art. And of course people did really amazing, beautiful things, and I was like, I can't really do that, so maybe I'll just do something abject. Maybe I'll really challenge it. And I knew the project was due in December. So in November, when I got my period, I was like, I think I'll invite a few folks over and we'll just see if they're open to this. And I was like, I told a couple of friends like, hey, would you be comfortable with coming over and just watching this art piece that I'm gonna do? Basically, I'm gonna menstruate and you'll watch it. And they were like, is there gonna be food? And so I was like, of course, like marinara chunky spaghetti, right? And so, and then two of them were like, can I bring my roommate? Can I bring my partner? And I was like, so then I had this moment of like, it's one thing for me to like menstruate in front of my friends. It's gonna be another thing to menstruate in front of these like strangers. But that moment was actually just like this. I was like, absolutely, like that sounds great. So they came over that evening and like the rules were that they couldn't talk. Like they would just be like in the bathroom and in the different spaces that I was gonna engage with my menstruation. But that we would talk at the end, kind of like a debriefing afterwards, because I felt like if there was talking during it, there might be a lot of like verbal discomforts and stuff like that, since I really intended on pushing it. Because when I said like, watch me menstruate, I think that that had the potential of being really passive, right? Like I would just sit there and nothing would happen. But I really like pushed it. So one of the things that I did was like I took out my Diva cup, right? So already this is a different type of menstruation that maybe they're used to, like with tampons and pads and stuff. There was a Diva cup involved. So now we saw the blood in like a liquid form as opposed to just like an absorbed kind of thing. So I took it out, and of course this like the bathroom is already small. My cat's like, I want to be a part of this, so the cat's in the room, and so it's kind of crowded. But they just kind of sat down, and we're already like. You know, and so, but they went with it, which is really great. And I just like took it out and emptied it in the sink, and the cat was watching. And I was also taking selfies with my phone to kind of like capture the everydayness of this, right? So I took a selfie with it, then I took a picture of my cat watching it, and that's part of what's in the art show upstairs. But then I like grabbed some of it, and before it was all over, and I put some like on my lips, right? Like you would lipstick. And so now there was like a real challenging. People were like, you know, and even me, like I had this moment of like, okay, this is gonna be real pungent, this is gonna be really intense, what if I taste some of it? And then in that moment I was like, what if I taste some of it, right? Because like 2 days earlier I had gotten a paper cut on my finger, and almost immediately I had been like, you know, like sucked up that like paper cut blood. So I was like, why is it that if this blood came out of like my vagina, my uterus, my cervix, that I'm like, oh, you know, on the lips is bad enough. So then I just like in the moment like took what was rest of the Diva cup and like put it in my mouth, right? And just like we swallowed it, and there was this like moment of real abject from everyone, including like myself. Like for a moment I was like, oh my, but then I just kept going, right? And then we went a step further, and we moved it to another room. People were already now just kind of like, oh my gosh. And also one of my main things was that everyone there could also take photos, like absolutely, of like me doing it, my vagina, my body, my cat, lots of the cat. Big part. And so we go into another space, and I lay back on a yoga mat, and I had a speculum, and I like basically just like opened my vagina and gave everyone like a flashlight, and they literally took turns like watching my like period come out of my cervix, which was very different than like when it's coming out of that vagina, right? Because now it's gonna come out of this space and kind of have this canal to come through. And I could tell that this was a moment when it was really hard, the rule to not speak, right? Because people wanted to say things about it, and some people, like two of the participants who I didn't know, they were so into it, right? Like I thought that they would be the biggest people like against it, but they were totally a part of it. So we did that, and then I'm trying to think of other ones, and then so in the end I like disposed of it and we were done. But I did have some coagulated blood that I had saved in a True Blood shot glass, because this is the truest blood, right? And people were passing it around, and it's just like literally it looks like little stones, and they were, you know, just having these moments with it, like, oh my gosh, like what is this? And so then at the end when we did the debriefing, there was literally like 2 minutes of just laughter, right? Of just people like, oh my god, like what was that, you know? And me like, yeah, what did you think, and there was really like positive feedback. Of course this was like a small group, obviously, but there was really positive feedback in the room from the people who had seen it and who had been like, I've just like never seen my own menstrual blood like that. I've never looked at menstrual blood like this. There was a lot of times when I was very uncomfortable and stuff. And so moving forward, I was like, well, feel free to post to social media. Let's see what happens. And so we did. And the only thing is that they had to use the hashtag cup of flow, which is the name of the art. And so, and I posted some pictures myself, mostly like the not very intense ones, right? So like nothing with like a full vagina, because I thought that might make people, like that might get it flagged. But then just like the cervix was okay and the lipstick and stuff. But immediately like Facebook was like, people, flagged it and told Facebook. And so Facebook contacted me and they're like, we're hearing that these images are very violent. Like violent was the word used, which was, so then I had to like respond to them, and I was like, actually this is all menstrual blood, so there was no violence in the making of it, and I would really like, if you do take it down, like I'll have to like make something big out of this, so like please don't. And they ultimately didn't. So Facebook did not. Facebook allowed it to stay up, but I did get like friends and people telling me like, I'm gonna have to unfriend you because this is just way too much, and I don't even like my own menstrual blood, so I definitely don't want to be seeing yours. And I was like, do what you gotta do. You gotta do you. So that's what happened. And then what's been interesting since then, right? This is just like, how much time do I have? Am I doing okay? Okay, so what's been interesting since then, now that I'm in the Widening the Cycle art show, which has been amazing, was like I posted about it, right? And since then I like had like a new partner, and his sister like called him like, did you see like what Diana did? Like, and he's like, yeah, I can't talk right now. Like he's right next to me, and I'm like, what you want? So just like the abject of it, right? Like people really struggling with it. And even when I went to like print out the pictures for the art show upstairs, this is like a place that does mainly like baby shower announcements, graduation announcements. And so when they were printing the pictures, the guy, like there's 5 pictures, all of them have menstrual blood. One of them is of a cervix, the other's like me eating period. And he's like, yours are the one with the cat, right? The picture of the cat. Because the pussy. Because my cat features in one of the pictures, and I was like, yeah, the cat pictures, yeah, that's me. So it's just been really interesting how people like still have to navigate it, right? Like even with this discomfort, like if they have to talk to me about it or have to like think of it, they still have to navigate it. So that was my goal, and it was just really like pushing the envelope and pushing myself, right? As like the period girl in my program, and I'm like, what does it mean if I myself am like uncomfortable with certain parts of my menstruation? So that's what the art did, and it's been really cool, really interesting. And it's in room 255, so if you're interested. And at the end of it, it's free. Like, I mean, take it. Take it if you want one for your bathroom or whatnot, Thanks.
I'm the only one that prepared written.
I think I'm the only one who did not.
Yeah.
False. Yeah.
So, unlike a lot of cultures, in Judaism, blood is actually considered a positive element. So it was really strange for me that during menstruation, women are considered impure, and that they are so impure that they actually defile people with their touch if they're menstruating. In Hebrew, Nidah is the name of a woman who's menstruating, and it is also, the literal meaning is one who is excluded. According to Jewish law, very traditional Orthodox homes, a Jewish man is forbidden to maintain sexual relations with his wife during and 7 days after her menstrual flow. Only after she performs a ritual immersion in the mikveh, which is a bath that some of you may have seen. There was a tour of the mikveh. Can she rejoin him in marital relations? So these laws were initially written down and set after the destruction of the Jewish temple, which was the beginning of the Common Era. And they were written down by rabbis who termed menstrual flow under the heading of discharge. So semen is discharge, or any kind of discharge from the body was under the same common topic. And they had no idea that that a menstrual flow was in any way connected to ovulation or fertility. And I think it's this ignorance of female physiology, which was the root for the laws that continue today. However, the question remains, why do women continue the tradition of nida, even when hygiene and knowledge of physiology have so advanced? To many Orthodox Jews, the adherence to the laws set by our ancestors is of utmost importance and can't be questioned or changed. It's something that they will always adhere to. But to others who may live non-Orthodox lives, it's enough to know the reasons behind the separation that the rabbis ordained. For many of us, traditions are not static, but kind of cultures in motion. As I slide into menopause, the topic of female purity was really interesting to me. And I decided to create a visual response to the research that I conducted on the tradition of nida. In the curses, which is the series of 7 banners that are hanging upstairs, I embroidered 7 line drawings of the physical effects that women have during their periods. By using embroidery, I refer to the large body of women's work of the past, where women had the rare chance to express themselves visually through using embroidery. My women have very incomplete torsos. They're considered incomplete by their partners. The somewhat abstracted figures leave much to the imagination, and they all have issues. They tilt and they hurt, and they're tired, but they're working really hard to maintain the cleanliness of the home. I've attempted to create very sensuous and elegant figures with the line drawings. The women have a simple beauty. It's universal. It doesn't really speak to one nationality or another nationality necessarily. And I think they're not off-putting. They're kind of strong and very aesthetic. They're supposed to be kind of women on their own. Below the embroideries are small little cloths, and they're called bdika cloths, and they're used by traditional Jewish women to check for purity during the 7 days after their period. I painted them with abstractions in bright colors to symbolize the inner life that these women have, that even though they're separate, they still have all kinds of wonderful things that they contribute to society. And the pieces are displayed as banners, like a family herald would be displayed on a castle wall. They're all women's banners, and they're not a point of shame to be hidden, but a point of pride to be displayed. The banners represent all women, not just Jewish women. And although nida may be solely a Jewish tradition, all cultures exclude or separate women in subtle and not so subtle ways. It's this universal exclusion that I react against with these pieces. Nida is a separation from who we are as wives, but I argue that it is a time for embracing who we are as women. The banners represent our maladies during this time, but the bdika cloths remind us that we continue to thrive and inspire under these circumstances.
Oh, hi. So I'm Ingrid Goldblum-Block, and I created the gun art, the gun in the back, the banner, the posters, as well as the quilt made out of tampons. And the both are part of the same boxes of tampons that I used. And I use humor in my art, irreverent humor, as a way to start conversations. And I know many of you are academics and come at this in a serious, scholarly way and present your ideas. I don't start that way. Often, I don't even have a message in mind, and I back into the message. So, for example, my tampon art started with a walk on the beach on Lake Michigan, and I don't know why, but there's always a stray tampon applicator on the beach. Yes. And I decided I was going to make a bathing suit called A Day at the Beach out of these tampon applicators. So I bought all these boxes of tampons, And that's how this started. It didn't start with a social commentary on menstruation and shame and beauty. It started with this bathing suit that then didn't happen and went away for 10 years. Flash forward to a couple years ago, I make a lot of art on women's bodies using recycled materials. I have a trashy lingerie series. I have a series of eyeglass art called My Eyes Are Down Here. My eyes are up here. Yeah. My eyes are down here. But it's a way to start the conversation of a bigger issue of how women are treated. And I decided, in keeping with this series that I have, that I've had for many years, of different types of bras, I also have steamy lingerie out of radiator covers, I was going to make bullet bra out of bullets. So being in Massachusetts, I called up a gun club and said, could I have your spent bullets? I'd like to make a bullet bra. And they said, do you have a gun license? And I said, what are you talking about? I don't want to shoot. So without boring you with the details, but this will turn into an art piece, you need a gun license in Massachusetts to handle, to touch any type of ammunition, even if it's spent. And if I planned on selling my art, I would be doing illegal arms trade. It's under, I have from a lawyer. And if somebody displays my art, it's, they have to have a gun license. So meanwhile, in the midst of this, I went to Flagstaff, Arizona, and drove into town, and there were signs, guns and liquor. And I thought, wow, it's easier to buy a gun than it is to make art. So I started thinking about these tampon applicators that didn't turn into a bathing suit, and I thought, I'm gonna make a gun called Feminine Protection. And at the time, I also didn't have anything beyond play on words. What does that mean? Is it a gun ad? Is it a tampon ad? And it's sort of in the back of my mind, I thought I'm gonna start a series of these fake ads where you don't know if it's pro-gun, pro-menstruation, who's sponsoring that, this is my first attempt, those posters. And I created this art piece. I, a few months ago, had a show with front and center the Feminine Protection art piece on a podium. No one would look at it. It wasn't even that they looked at it and looked away. They pretended it wasn't in the room. And so much so that a woman fell over the podium and it landed. So I sat back thinking, this is fascinating that people are so horrified. Is it that they're horrified by guns or by tampons? So I moved it the next day into a different location because I thought, well, maybe it's too front and center. It's like mannequins when you walk into a room. And then I hung it on a wall with a black. The next day I watched and I realized that the only people that really engaged in my art were men talking about, isn't it funny that it's a gun? And I am fascinated that gun culture, that people can talk about guns, controversial, pro-gun, anti-gun. It is in the legislation, but that kind of blood and that type of violence is acceptable, and it's acceptable discussion than anything around menstruation, which is not acceptable discussion. It's so shameful. So I feel that I'm at the beginning of moving into where this art is going to go. Once I did the art, I found out about this art show. And with my own humor, what are all the slogans I could have? Feminine protection, stop the flow of violence, period. So I see this art in a guerrilla way. Jen had asked me to make a banner that was supposed to be behind here. I don't know if you've seen my big banner up in the faculty dining room. I see this with people printing it out and hanging it over overpasses with different kinds of slogans on these posters. So I'd like to offer to the room, if anybody wants to get in touch with me and use my images, print them out, I'm all for discussion of where this can go. So where I really see this going, and I heard from Jen that one of the discussions is how do you get people to talk about art and these topics of menstrual rights and menstruation and reproductive justice. I always find that humor is a way to engage a wider audience. I would not have had men coming up to look at my gun made out of tampons if I said, come look at my tampon piece. Little digression, I have a local hardware store that the men in that store have seen more of this gun than they have ever wanted to. So I use raw materials, as I say, I take everyday objects and transform them into something else. And to me, it just becomes an art medium. So I was trying to figure out, how do I get these tampon applicators to stick together? And by the way, they're made out of something that nothing sticks together. 5-minute epoxy, Gorilla Glue.
Wow.
So I had a handful of tampon applicators, and I walked into my local suburban hardware store in Needham, Massachusetts, for those of you who are local. And I said, I can't get these to stick together. Do you know what kind of substance I can use? And they just all turned bright red, and they're horrified. And then they got into the, how can we fix this? So I got them to the point where they are gluing it. 2 of them are around. They're duct taping it. And right before this show, I walked in with my gun, and I said, I need to figure out a way to display my gun. My pedestal broke, and I need something else. And they're in the hardware store, and people are walking around. So I feel that this artwork has become accidentally engaging with the public. And it's also transformed me as a woman in terms of, how do I feel about menstruation? How much do I want to step out into this world, your world, of these conversations? I wasn't signed up for the conference. Jen, I said, oh, you can give my ticket to somebody else. And it's fascinating to me to pay attention to my own sort of thoughts and attractions and repulsions that I am not necessarily proud of, in that I want to have people talk about this art. I want them to engage in it. I want this to be, why is it a big deal? And yet, why did I look at your art and think, is she eating that? Like, oh. So it's interesting and upsetting to me that somebody like me who thinks I'm open can still be repulsed. And then I think, wow, then what does that say for the everyday person? And so to me, the one way to get the everyday person to engage is through humor, through everyday artwork, through conversations. And I will end this with a song. I do not sing well. I've never sang in public, but this is a song that I wrote in college to deal with menstruation. And my friends and I sing it, and if anybody would like the words, we can do it. Jen has heard it. You can tell by her smell she's not feeling very well when the end of the month rolls around. You can tell by her pout that her eggs are falling out when the end of the month rolls around. Well, it's hi, hi, he for the Kotex industry. Shout out your sizes loud and clear. Junior Miss Super Duper Bale of Hay. And wherever you go, you will always know when the end of the month rolls around. You can tell by her stance that you'll get a red mustache when the end of the month rolls around. Oh wait, that was supposed to be flash, that you'll get a red mustache. You can tell by her stance that she's bleeding in her pants when the end of, and so on and so forth. And as I look around at your faces of sort of, this is cool, and ooh, it's interesting to know that humor in menstruation and how people react can be a way to engage the wider audience. So.
Excellent.
I just thank you, Jen, for organizing this. It's so amazing. Jen is incredible if you don't know her. I just want to know by show of hands who, if you feel comfortable, who in the room is menstruating right now? Yes.
Right now, today?
Like right now, today. Yeah. Solidarity and blood. Yay. So it's like a social performance. What was that?
She's like, does Monday count?
Yes, it counts. I think it counts. So rather than talking about the work I have upstairs, I'm going to talk about a little, like, very briefly, how I got from creating images and objects in my practice to doing education and social practice as a form of really engaging with, as Jen read, the construction of female identity in relationship to the body and what that means. So when I first started making work, I was creating images of the literal female figure and the abstracted female figure in paintings and sculpture and installation. And I was doing that as a way of reappropriating cultural space and cultural images of the female body. I felt that, I started doing this when I was 17. I was deeply entrenched in pop culture. I was in high school. I was really into the male gaze, and I didn't have a word for that. So I was just like, male gaze at me. And so this, I was like, how can I be, a radical feminist and still be completely entrained to this mandate to kind of, fall in line with the beauty myth, which says that a woman's real power comes from how she looks and not what she's capable of. So I created these images, and I felt that by making my own images, I could counteract that, just the proliferation of images of the female body that were objectifying in media. And it gave me a little bit of freedom, and really sort of was a way for me to decolonize my own body and my own image, and reclaim my right to author and construct my own identity. And I started collecting my menstrual blood, and it was a really intense experience for me. It's not intense for every woman, and I know that some people feel certain experiences when they collect their blood, but for me it was very intense, and I would save it in a jar, and the experience of saving my blood and living with my blood, I put it in my studio, was very different than talking about my blood, talking about menstruation, talking about female health. It was very different than engaging with my blood, even emptying the cup and rinsing it out down the sink, and it was different than tampon or pad use. And I was very curious about that. The first time I started collecting it, I had such a profound sense of upset, and like, it was upsetting, it was repulsive, and I was just like, wow, it was not these sort of, zippy third wave feminist, like blood, sex positivity. It was like less earth goddess and more like Kali, like goddess of destruction and creation. And I thought, this is interesting. Like, I think that, and I mean, I'm a self-named radical feminist, but I think that something can sometimes get lost in a third wave understanding of the body and of blood, and can end up being a way of sanitizing the blood and sanitizing the vulva and the vagina. And I had a student in one of my classes say like, oh, I think my vagina is cute. And I was like, that's awesome, but we don't owe anyone a cute vagina, right? Like, vulvas and vaginas are for feeling and experiencing and existing. They're not for, their power does not come in how they look. So I felt the same way with the blood. Like, there's this sanitization, and what if, it has a dual nature of sort of being creative and also destructive? And what if that nature is what we are so afraid of in women's bodies? And, thinking a lot of abortion and this kind of like idea of, we've talked about in the conference, some of the panels, reclaiming the word abortion. And, in my work in New Mexico and activism, it's very clear in our messaging with, working with legislators, that we say abortion and not reproductive freedom or reproductive health, that we say abortion. And I think that there's a lot of terror around the fact that a woman really does have this capacity to choose whether or not to give life. Am I out of time? Okay. And I felt it was the same way with the blood, that this blood was like intense, and it didn't need to be not intense, and that maybe the repulsion was a reaction to power and not pollution. And I noticed that other people had this, very intense reactions as well. Like, they would physically move away, they would cover their eyes, they were upset. And I was thinking, okay, I'm in the presence of taboo. And I don't think that taboo necessarily equals oppressive terribleness. I think that taboo is multivalent. I think that taboo can also serve as a mechanism for organizing society and defining power and protecting menstrual blood as a sacred experience. And I was just very curious about that. Why is there this taboo around that? And I found that by saving my blood and talking about it, it was the same as creating images. I could sort of decolonize menstruation. And yeah, thanks. And that it was much more important for me to do that with people and not, I really loathe the art world. I'm sure some academics love their work and loathe, academia, and I feel the same way. I love my work and I deeply loathe the art world and the institution of that and the privilege of that. And so just sort of, decentralizing my practice from the studio, from the, the white cube of the gallery, and just talking to people and educating them directly is, I just feel it's a more effective way of creating social change and transforming that. Yes, okay, so thanks for being here.
Okay, hi, I'm Kyle. I do not identify as a woman. I have a uterus and I menstruate. And the piece that I created for the show is me trying to come to terms with that. So my piece is up in 255, I believe, and it's a self-portrait of my arm, and I have a lot of self-harm scars from when I was dealing with a lot of feelings of dysphoria and gender dysphoria, not knowing how to work with a body that seemed like it was completely rebelling against me. And I chose to depict my hand with a tampon and not another part of my body because I wanted to show the activity of all the other things that are happening with my body, and also somehow bring it away from those specific parts so that I could continue to identify as not a woman and still menstruate and still continue to be somewhere in relation to menstruation and have it still apply to me but not be so specific. And so with my piece, I'm really trying to broaden what a menstruating person is to other people, anyone who has a uterus, who can bleed. And so from there, I was also really trying to focus on claiming an identity and a space for people who aren't being helped by the traditional routes and mechanisms and everything, support structures for menstruation. So when I was younger, I couldn't talk about menstruation. When I got here yesterday, I started having a panic attack because menstruation is still a big thing for me. And I wanted to make a link between what had happened to me and what had happened to some other people that I know, between that and menstruation and gender identity, and how it doesn't always line up and it doesn't always make sense to other people. So with doctors don't always understand, and counselors don't always understand, and sometimes counselors and doctors can't communicate well with each other. For me, living in New York State, the New York State Board of Doctors, they don't acknowledge uteruses, that it's basically a part of family planning, and anything to do with that is family planning. And if you don't, it doesn't matter if you're actually planning for a family, you can't get birth control, you can't say, hey, I'm transgender, I want to get rid of my uterus, can you help me? They won't help you. So basically, I wasn't getting the help that I needed from my doctors, from my counselors, and I wasn't really getting it from my family or my friends because they didn't understand. Nobody really plans for this. They're just like, oh, you tell them you're menstruating, this is what happens, be fine. And so this piece, I was trying to create that connection between all these things and create a space for people to talk about these things. And going to college, that was a privilege for me and for a lot of people, and going to college opened up those avenues for me to talk about these things. And so with my art, I'm trying to continue to open up those avenues for other people to talk about things. I'm trying to bring it back to my little tiny town with all my friends who didn't get to talk about those things. So I'm trying to open up a dialogue for other identities for menstruating and ways to embrace it so that it doesn't have to be a negative experience. You don't have to have these really upsetting times. You can be like, I'm not a woman, but I menstruate, and that's okay, and this is my identity, and not have to constantly be like, no, it's true. No, it's true. It's true. I swear to God, it's true. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to create another space.
Thank you, everybody, for speaking. It's really exciting to have so many different perspectives and all the different ways that menstruating intersects with all of our lives and how it plays into the human rights angle for all bodies that menstruate. So we've got about 10 minutes left before we take our break, so I wanted to open it up if anyone has questions. I know we have other participating artists who are here, and if anybody has questions, I'll run around with the mic.
Thank you. I just want to say I really appreciate all of your work and this whole exhibit, and even that we're talking about blood. I just, like, for me, I love menstrual blood, and I would use a cup, forget all the health and environment and cost-saving reasons, just because you can see the blood, right? So there's a way in which I'm fascinated by the blood and the specific reactions to it, right? And what does that mean? And like, even the tampon is almost like a euphemism for the blood, right? It's like we're like, oh, getting close, right? And so how, yeah, I guess I'm curious, like some of you touched on it, but like the power of the actual menstrual blood and how we relate to it, or completely, we can't even, it's so powerful, we can't even engage with it. We just, avoid, disconnect, or like what, the physical blood, how does that show up? Or what might we do with that a little bit more?
I'll take that one. So that's such a good question. I'm kind of grappling with the same question in my work, and I don't know if there is an answer, but I think that, when I was saving my blood, I'm still saving it, but when I started, and as I say, it was in my space with me, and I felt that it was cognizant. I felt that, it was of me, but it was also greater than me. And it was of me, but it was other than me. And what does it mean to collect the self and to understand menstrual blood also as a way of understanding self and as a way of understanding time as well? And sort of the periodicity of self, the periodicity of time, the periodicity of life. And I think that, throughout history, as long as uteruses have menstruated, there has been an intense social construction around understanding like what that means. I think that menstruation it's a socioeconomic, gendered issue, but it's also a psychosocial issue. The menstruating body is having, is a different sort of psychic shape to experience menstruation. And I think that it is also a profound experience for everyone in the community who's dealing with menstruation. And a lot of, there's been some kind of thumbs down on anthropologists at the conference, but anthropologists do some really interesting work around looking at menstrual taboo. And, one of the things they find is that most cultures have menstrual taboo. Many of those cultures, the taboo is not a way to say, you're so dirty, get away from us. In some cultures, it is. And how the taboo, like whether it's oppressive or empowering, says something about gender equality or inequality in that social group. So I think that what we see with contemporary Western attitudes towards menstruation is reflective of contemporary Western attitudes towards the female body. And I think that that's why putting the blood out there, creating, putting it in the visual media space is a way to shift that. That's a great question.
Hi, thank you. My name is Yael, and I actually have two questions that have nothing to do with each other. One is, has anybody seen, a few months ago, the Egyptian feminist defecating and menstruating on the ISIS flag? And if anybody wants to say your opinion about that. The second question is, yesterday I stood up here and I told everybody about endometriosis and how I think that we should all not only talk about menstruation and teach it and what we need to do with it, but actually we need to teach it in a way that people need to see it and know if it's normal or abnormal so they can know their own health risks. And yesterday I was talking to somebody who does paint. I think it was this lady, I don't remember her name.
She's there.
Yes. And we were talking yesterday, and I said, wow, I think that we could actually use art to educate people about endometriosis and about what is good, I don't want to say good blood or bad blood, but what is normal bleeding, what is abnormal bleeding, what is a normal color of your menstruation blood as opposed to an abnormal color of menstruation blood. And has anybody done that yet? And if nobody has, I would love to pair up with anybody who wants to do that.
Yes, definitely. Sign me up.
Sure, go ahead.
I have something to say about that. Whenever I go to a show like this one, I heard it here, I heard it the last show that I did where I had my menstrual art on display. I've heard it in my studio from people who are like around me all the time, where they're like, why is it brown? Why is it this color? Why is it lumpy? Why is it like this? And it's like, what are you expecting it to look like?
Right.
So I feel like people don't have like a conception of what it's supposed to look like at all, even if it's normal, abnormal, new, old, whatever. There's just like a complete disconnect from like our bodies, because most people in this room probably know what menstrual blood looks like, but like don't know if it's normal, abnormal. If just like we have this idea it's supposed to be red. It's supposed to be red and like blood. And if it's not, there must be something wrong.
Well, here's just a little bit of educational anecdote, is if your blood is brown, it means that it has stayed in your body for a while, and when it comes out, it doesn't have a lot of oxygen. So if you do experience that, you should check it out, because that is not normal. And I did not know that for so long, and I had so many complications, and all I want is for young girls and for women not to have that, and to see the first or the second time when they get their menstrual cycle, is this a normal smell even? We don't talk about that. You know, is this a normal smell? Is this a normal texture? Is this a normal color? And I think that can just help so many women, not only in their teenage years, but then going on and wanting to have a family and overall health.
Oh, I just want to. Oh, sorry. Go. I haven't talked.
In the Talmud, if you're familiar with the Talmud, the sages actually have talked about the 5 different colors of menstrual blood. I mean, they knew about it back then. So they were ignorant, but they weren't stupid.
Oh, just check out the Instagram in case you're curious. It's through Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains, and it's like I'm a sex educator as well, and we just did a video on endometriosis, and I did it, was able to do a drawing of it. So check that out. I think it is happening, and it's very cool.
I'm Nancy Ream, and I'm a longtime member of this society going way back. I was a past president in the 80s. And this is amazing, and I think it's only because of this society that it makes perfect sense that we have now, we have an art panel. I mean, what other scientific research organization would do that? Overlaps between the work that we were doing 40 years ago, maybe, with menstrual blood, working with it because it was around I guess in the 80s, around the TSS tragedies, that this organization partnered with the FDA, and I was the lab at the University of Michigan that served as the representative lab. There were 4 other industry labs that were doing this research on tampon absorbency, and huge arguments went on for 2 years actually about why we should use menstrual blood when we were testing the products. And my lab was the only one that went ahead and used, I used menstrual blood. I collected from OB nurses themselves with the cup, because they really had, they were very comfortable working with menstrual blood. I'm an ex-OB nurse, and postpartum bleeding is everywhere. But also, and we use the cup, and but also I went to the hospital and used outdated clotted blood, after it had already been, the clot had lysed. So that's what menstrual blood is. And I used an instrument for testing the viscosity of blood that they use in paint to test the different viscosities of blood. And so there was a lot of information. And I also looked at the interaction between the tampons and the blood with a scanning electron microscope so that you could actually see the interaction of the cells and the fluid and the liquid. And I had a poster, and I was like, oh my God, this was art, and I didn't even really know it. Because what you're talking about is so similar in so many ways. And I think even today, what you described as art, when you brought your friends into the bathroom, I mean, that's what the Boston Women's Health Book Collective did. Gave everybody a mirror and sat on the floor and looked at each other and started to think in those ways. So it's just so perfect that this has come full circle. That's my comment.
I will say, Rob and I are the artists behind Beauty and Blood, and we do the macro photography of menstrual blood. If anybody has any ideas how to safely send me samples, we would love to take our project to the next level and start doing macro photography of other bodies that menstruates production. So if anybody knows or anybody's interested, holler at me. There's stuff in the our little folders. Any more questions? We've got like 3 minutes before we need to take a break before Loretta Ross. Going over to Lisa.
I'm just curious to know if any of you know of any notable artists who are working with cervical mucus in their art.
Maybe we're going to have to make that the next step.
I'm from San Francisco with the Red Web Foundation, and I'm just fantasizing about a big art show in San Francisco Bay Area.
Excellent.
How hard is it to get your work shown in standard galleries? And
Jen.
answer earlier.
No.
But we would love to host one at some point.
Impossible.
I'm just going to throw this in there. It's really difficult, and I think we've all had this conversation, and the other artists who are here. We pretty much only look for groups who are interested in feminism, and that's almost the only avenue that we can go into. I know I've tried to get into some science-related shows and tried to do some medical humanities with the hospitals, and have been told it's inflammatory and obscene's not the word, but it causes anxiety in patients because it's blood, which I think is bullshit, because we need to see it and we need to talk about it because there are many people who are menstruating. So let's talk.
I'll add to this that my quilt out of tampons, I offered it to my OBGYN's office, and they said it's not appropriate. It's too, it's not a flower.
It's the blue.
It's not a flower. So I thought, wouldn't it be lovely if there's art, menstrual art in OBGYN's offices, the most obvious next step for education. And as you were talking, and I know Jen didn't mention this, but even this show was taken out of publications announcing it. If you look at the rooms, they had to black out the rooms, and here's a law school. Right. So it's so taboo. Even my trashy lingerie art was removed from, it was in a recycled show in the airport. It was removed because it wasn't appropriate for the business traveler. So the puritanical nature of Boston, but also maybe San Francisco would be more receptive.
So we are coming right down to the end. I've got one question here, and then Jennifer. Oh, Jennifer's got a response, and then I'll come right back to you.
You are now.
I wanted all the artists here.
I know. I know.
What is she wearing? Oh, tell me.
I, a while back, curated a local show about menstruation and reproductive health that traveled kind of throughout the St. Louis region with a similar vision that we wanted to start off at maybe a university gallery and then just take a tour of gynecological offices in different places that seemed more welcoming to it. And it took me over a year just to find a venue. And I mean, we had this vision where it was going to travel, and we made up our own exhibition catalog. And we did manage to travel to 4 different locations, but most of it was just through, like, just force of will and very, very strong friendships with other very influential people involved in the show who could say, I want this in my gallery. We were in a gallery that was a converted garage behind somebody's house, and they hosted us there in Cape Girardeau. There was another gallery that I had partnered with before that let us there for one night for a preview exhibition. And then we had 2 university galleries that did actually wind up taking it. But I had proposed it to another organization, and their response, and they'd been trying to, we had a guest curator, we were working with people, and their response was, we've been trying to work with this person forever, and this is an amazing group of women, and if they would do something on any other topic, we would take them.
Wow.
And then, like, I didn't think about it at the time that we should have done something even more controversial and just gone in and be like, oh, sure, we're doing something else. But it was extremely challenging to pursue, and it's part of why I gave up on that avenue at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got one back there, and then.
She's so wonderful.
Hi, I don't know why I'm not on the panel. I didn't apply, that's why. But I'm Deb Wiles. I did the vulvas. I cast the vulvas of 52 women in bronze. And the thing that actually brought me to doing that piece in the first place is menstrual blood. But that's another story, and I'm happy to tell you about it later. I don't have much time. But I wanted to address the thing about being a woman artist and showing art. These are bronze. It's a very traditional material. I live in Canada. Maclean's magazine, which is like the equivalent of America's Time magazine, actually picked it up and did a piece about it years ago. But the art industry in Canada won't go anywhere near it. I had one show in a very small town that was a solo show. But that's one thing. Getting a show is one thing as a female artist. Getting paid to show is the key. We don't get paid to show. And the discrepancy all across the world with men showing their work and women showing their work, it's about 80 to 20 or less. So that's the kind of glass ceiling that you hit really, really quickly as a female artist. Like, it's not supposed to be a hobby if you're an artist. It's supposed to be the way you make your living. So I just wanted to address that. I would love to show, but I've decided not to show anymore unless I'm getting paid artist fees, just because it costs too much, frankly. And we're professionals, so I just think we should be paid, and it's difficult to actually get shows to do that. I really wanted to come and do this show. It works for me, the material of it and stuff, but, and Jen worked so hard with being a volunteer to organize this whole thing.
Yes.
Woo!
Thank you.
Can I throw out really quickly just the idea that maybe we don't have to wait for permission or a venue to offer it up, but choose another way, which is why I'm interested in billboards, or Jen shared the artist that had maxi pads all over Germany with sayings that is there another way to do this? We have such power as women. You could do art, a social movement, a social media movement timed to menstruating bodies' periods. And every time you have your period, you do something to your Congress, or if you have such power in that.
Can we do that, please? Like, that's amazing. That was so good.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and being so engaged with the art. This has been.
I want to take a picture of our panel.
Your whole life would be absolutely completely different, or do you think that